All right. This session's being recorded now. So welcome everyone to the inaugural session of the Sydney Excel user group. Thank you for joining us, whether you're doing it live or doing it virtually. My name's Tim Hang. I'm going to be hosting today, but we've got a special guest with us, Kaycee from the Excel program management team. So Sheila's going to be running a session on what's new in Excel. Before we do that, though, we thought we'd go through a little bit of the admin side. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Aurora Nation, the traditional custodians of the Sydney CBD. Pay respects to the elders, both past and present. Basic kind of rules for running any sort of webinar type thing. Please stay on mute unless presenting or asking a question. Use the raise hand tool to indicate that you want to ask a question or ask the question in the meeting chat. I will try to filter any questions out that need to be answered on the spot and raise that to Kaycee as we go. Most importantly, do please show others respect and consideration throughout this webinar. For those who aren't aware, the Sydney Excel user group has only very recently been created, so thank you everyone who is watching this and is taking part in this. The goal is essentially to bring Excel users together to share ideas, tips, and tricks. And as Danielle was kind of mentioning just a second ago before we started, the intention was initially to kind of make this Sydney focused, but in this day and age, it's kind of hard to sort of catch up in person. So virtually is kind of the best way to go right now. And if we're going to do it virtually for people in Sydney, we might as well kind of cast it out for virtually anyone outside of Sydney as well. So if you are joining us outside the Sydney, New South Wales sort of area, welcome. You can be honorary Sydney-siders, that's fine. Especially if you're from Melbourne, like Liam. I can see him shaking his head here. But yeah, the idea is that by being here, you can learn from a range of Excel experts. We're going to try our best to bring in some great people who know a lot about Excel to present on a range of topics. Kaycee is going to be here as our first. I know Danielle has agreed to present a session in the future as well. Liam will probably present a session. I'll do the next session just for the sake of trying to organize something. But we'll be trying to get a bunch of MVPs and other experts around, and hopefully there'll be a lot of really great things to learn. It's not all just about Excel, though. The idea is that when we're working in Office 365 and modern Excel nowadays, it's not all about Excel. There's also other tools available within the Excel and Office family. And so thinking things like forms, like Power Automate, Power BI, and so forth. So for those of you who might be using Excel and trying to be more efficient, perhaps there are actually other tools in the Office family that are better for you, essentially. And so the next session we're going to run is actually one that looks at Microsoft Forms and how that can integrate nicely with Excel. So we'll be talking about a bit outside the Excel component. And finally, we'll be trying to promote best practices to improve efficiency and effectiveness. So the goal is for you to be more efficient at what you do, so you've got more time to do the things you want to rather than the things you have to at the end of the day. The idea of the Sydney Excel user group isn't so much to be this power user type of group. One of the things that really put me off the whole pugs as such in the past was actually attending a Power BI user group that Matt Allington ran. And this is no disrespect to Matt Allington, but his crowd tend to be a lot more sophisticated, let's say. And I remember showing up and being told, or just asking the question, can we do some more intro level things? And someone said to me there, hey, they call this a power user group for a reason, because we're expecting everyone here to be power users, and the basic stuff's kind of boring. And I was just thinking, well, hold on a second. I'm pretty sure it's called a Power BI user group. You're missing 2 letters in there. And secondly, what resources are there for people who are sort of, learning the ropes and trying to get up to speed? So the intention of this user group is essentially supposed to be something that is kind of applicable to everybody. So you don't need to be working in finance. You don't need to be working for 30 years in Excel in order to sort of take benefit and get some useful tips and tricks out of this. We're not necessarily going to be doing deep dives into specific topics, though, we probably will at some point. The idea is that there will be a range and breadth of topics. So people who have 30 years of experience can benefit from it, and people who have no years of experience can also benefit from it. I've seen people who have RSVP'd with 20, 30 years of experience who are directors of teams. I've seen people who've RSVP'd who are fresh graduates and have no actual working experience. And so the idea is that what we present through this group should hopefully be applicable to everybody. So that's kind of the vision of the Excel user group. I'll shut up because I've spent too long waffling on about administrative stuff. So if you are interested, please invite other people so they can benefit from this. But for now, let's pass things on to Kaycee. Welcome, Kaycee. Thank you for coming and joining us. And apologies to everyone that this is at 8 a.m. This is so that Kaycee can join us from Redmond. So Kaycee, I'll pass it on to you.
Hi, yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. I know you cast a wide net to like, hey, anyone on the PM team, but I love doing these things and hearing you introduce the group as like a, yes, this is for everybody, not just advanced users, really like touches my heart because working on the Excel team, I know how many users of Excel are not advanced users. And there's a lot of people who like just getting them to a simple sum function makes them like in the top 50% of advanced users for Excel. So it's pretty great to hear that this group has started, and I hope that it picks up steam and continues. So thank you so much for inviting me today. Yes, I am located in Redmond, Washington, so I'm still in yesterday for you folks, but we figured this would be an okay time, possibly before some kids go to school, for people to join and not necessarily during the lunch hour. So I'm going to share my screen, and instead of using the PowerPoint live, because I'll be transitioning from PowerPoint to Excel, I just wanted to share my whole screen here. So this is my presentation. I call it Excel for fun because I think Excel is fun, and all of the new features that we're adding I think are fun. So yes, my name is Kaycee Reineke. The agenda that I have to talk about basically for the next 45 minutes is, dynamic arrays, new functions like XLOOKUP, LET, and Lambda. And then at the end, I can talk about some of the new linked data types that we have available in Excel. But, when talking to Tim in preparation for this, dynamic arrays, I'm going to start with that because it might be the most useful content for people who maybe are upgrading their Excel to be the latest and greatest, like on M365, and you're going to see dynamic arrays for the first time, and it's shocking at first, but so simple and so great. So we'll start with who I am. Like I said, my name is Kaycee Reineke. I have been a program manager on Excel since 2017. I consider myself a major in rich data, and I minor in calc, which is like functions and stuff. And rich data is the stuff I'll talk about at the very end, which is basically the future of Excel and how to look at things as more than two-dimensional. I consider my favorite function to be the sum function. You may have noticed that when I said, if you use a function in Excel, you really are in the top 50% of Excel power users. And I'm one of those people who, before joining the Excel team, was very basic, and the power of just learning how to do a sum function instead of having Excel open and using my calculator to do the total and then putting it in a cell just kind of like changed my world. And now I use sum function all the time, and I know it's basic, but it's my favorite. Then my least favorite function is VLOOKUP, and that's probably because of my coworker Joe McDade and his disdain for the VLOOKUP function, because when using it, there are so many things that could go wrong with the VLOOKUP function. And today I'll talk about the XLOOKUP function, which basically replaces the need for VLOOKUP, and you can't get into any of the hairy situations that VLOOKUP can put you in. So it really just VLOOKUP bad, XLOOKUP good. Oh yeah, and on this slide also, there's a couple fun things that I use Excel for. I used it to plan my wedding. I had like 80 tabs, I feel like, for my wedding planning in Excel. I track my vacation days and review my bank statements and do so many things at work for Excel, like in Excel, for Excel, yeah. So the first two things I want to talk about are dynamic arrays and XLOOKUP. And we'll start with dynamic arrays. And I'm going to do that by just jumping into an example. So this is a Excel sheet that we've set up to track an inventory of our stock in our store. So you can see here that there's products where we've sold those products, how many units, the price of the units, and what our return or revenue is there. So this is a full list, and you can see it has multiple binoculars, backpacks, tents, etc. And my goal in using the sheet is to summarize this this sales table into, you know, what did we sell and how many units of it did we sell in total. And in order to do that, before dynamic arrays, I would have to go through a couple different hoops to figure out how to, you know, get all the kites, get all the tents, get all the binoculars, and sum those all together and then make sure they have their own rows. With dynamic arrays, I'm going to use one of our new functions that is supported. So there is a function called unique, and that is a new function that is powered by dynamic arrays. And it is kind of one of those baselines for how to get started understanding what a dynamic array is and how you can use it. So in order to access that function, you type equals, which will bring up the dropdown, and equals unique is the function I want. You can see the little hint for, oh, what do I give this function? And things in the brackets in the function signatures that show up as the hints are optional. So I only need to give this function one argument, and that is the array. In this case, I want my product to be that array. So I'm going to give it that whole product column, and it will return to me the unique values in that column. So Excel went through calculation and returned to me these 5 items that are in the product category. And you can see that that's true because when I go to the filter, you can see I have 5 items in here. Now, previously in Excel, one of the harder parts is, okay, I have these 5 items, and maybe I went through to do special math to get kite, tent, binocular, backpack, compass, but what if we added something new to our product line, like boots? And now boots suddenly appears in my product table. The reason dynamic arrays are dynamic in their name is that this function operated on that whole column and dynamically grew to include boots because it was found in that array. So I went from, you know, 5 items to 6 items dynamically. And so now that we have an array, a dynamic array in the grid using that unique function, one of the things I'm going to point out is that it has this light blue, and sometimes it's different colors, but it has this outline around it. And that outline is trying to indicate for you that this is a contained unit. So while tent is in this cell, I can copy it and I can paste here, and you'll see the word, whoop, I can paste, and you can see the word tent there in the cell because I copied it. I am not allowed to edit this formula from this cell because the formula lives in cell H5 here, and the output is spilled down into my column on the grid here. So if I were to type over this something like hi and hit enter, you'd think that would mess up my entire table, but it doesn't. What we do is actually give you an error, and it's called a pound spill error. And when you're first working with functions that are return arrays, you might see this error a lot more than you'd like, but there are easy ways to get rid of this error and like reformat your content so that you no longer see the pound spill. So when you hover or when you select the cell that has the pound spill error in it, you see this like dotted line around it, and that means this is the space in your grid that I currently want to take up. And so you have something within that space that's keeping me from showing you the result of my data. We also have a helpful little feature if you hover over this exclamation point and go to select obstructing cells. We will take you right to the cell that is obstructing your data so that you can either move it, delete it, put it somewhere else. So we're not going to overwrite your data for you just because you're using arrays, but we are going to make you move that data yourself in order to correct that pound spill error. Now, that's kind of the basics for how a single array can spill here. In terms of units over here, I want to show you that the dynamic nature of arrays can work with functions as well. And so in this case, I'm going to use the SUMIF function. And I have a handy little cheat sheet right here to remind me what to do. Okay, so I'm going to use the SUMIF function. And so I'm going to SUMIF because I want the total units of kites. So if this range, sorry, I haven't done this demo in a little bit. Product and sales, that's right. Okay, so I'm going to start by just copying this and then I'll walk through it. So one second. Okay, we'll start with this example. So in this range, I have a formula that is summing all of my units for my product, and I have selected H5 through H8, which is, these 4 cells here that are the output of my dynamic array. So I'm going to, basically, I sum the entire sales for if it's kite, it adds it together. But you can see that I actually edited my cheat sheet formula, so you could see that this is actually limited to just this range of H5 through H8. And so what happens is that when I added boots or backpack or compass, it's not going to grow dynamically. This units column isn't going to grow dynamically. So if I go back to having tent here, then I guess I should have. Thanks for bearing with me, folks. I will take questions in case this doesn't become clear, but I'm trying to set you up for like a cool reveal, but I'm not so great at the punchline at the moment. So the cool reveal situation is that my Excel had frozen. Come on. Okay, this is a more concrete example. No, come on, Excel. Okay. What did I do? What did I do? Quit out. It. Okay. So this is, I just want you to know, this isn't a problem. Like, the reason I'm having bad behavior is because I'm running the latest and greatest builds of Excel, and sometimes internally we have issues that don't reproduce for you guys because we find those bugs first. So I will just leave this as is for now, and hopefully you can get the understanding, because for some reason I'm having trouble editing my formula, and that's, my current build. Not a problem that you folks will experience, I promise. So the situation here is that I have a concrete range. I have selected cells H5 through H8. And what's wrong with that, or what's troublesome about that, is the fact that this product column is a dynamic array. And so it's going to keep growing, but my formula here has a fixed range selected. And in order to kind of improve that ability, we've added, I'm just going to delete this whole thing. Come on. Did I lock it? What is your problem? Seriously, it's not a demo unless something goes wrong, right? Seriously, I'm just trying to delete a formula, folks. I really apologize for this being very, very silly at the moment. Come on, go away. No, that's not working either. Go away. Okay, well, this is awkward. Awkward. Okay, so what I wanted to show you, for some reason it won't let me edit that formula, but what I wanted to show you was, oh my gosh, Okay, we're gonna close and reopen everything. So give me 1 second. Pause for a brief intermission. We're just gonna start over with this silly workbook.
As Liam says, we've all been there, Kaycee. It's okay. I think anyone who's presented has had issues like this before, where Excel has had some sort of great update that, changed things, let's say.
Yeah, well, thank you for, being patient with me. I do not know what it's one of those things where as soon as this is over, I'm going to go back to my team and file a really nasty bug on my folks. So they're not going to be happy, but I'm happy. Okay, thanks for your patience. Let's try this again. And you guys, so I can see you. Great. Thank you, Danielle, for the heart. That really helps me. So in this example, I have a formula that has a fixed range, H5 through H9. When I change one of my products or add a new product to my inventory, you will see that the dynamic array grows, but my fixed range formula does not grow. I need it to grow as a part of my dynamic array. So what we have set up for formulas is the fact that I can take a fixed array like H5 through H9 and replace it by selecting the entire array. And you can see when I selected those 6 cells, it replaced, I'm pointing at my screen, you can't see it, but it replaced that fixed array of H5 through H9 with H5 pound, or hashtag as the kids call it. And we use that notation in any formula to mean start at this cell, give me the entire array that starts at that cell. So now when I add maybe something like goggles to my list, it dynamically grows as well. And that is because of this funky notation that is start in cell H5, select the entire array. So that is the important part that I wanted you to take away from that last 6 minutes of struggle. So thank you. Now, the next part, and that's using just the unique function, which is a life-saving function that uses dynamic arrays because the output of that function is a dynamic array. And that is, in summary, using array notation, which is with that hashtag, but also to kind of show and prove that all of our functions are array aware. And so hopefully now when you do things like sum if on that array and to get the individual units as outputs, it's just going to work as expected and you won't have to go through any gymnastics to try to get a simple product summary like this to work. And so then the next kind of function I wanted you to be aware of is people often ask, okay, great, I have these dynamic arrays, but they don't work with, these fancy filter features like we have at the top of tables, that drop down that shows you what you can filter to. Well, because dynamic arrays are kind of you can use them outside of a table, and that's kind of one of their main benefits, is that you can kind of create these two-dimensional tables by just using an array, and then you're going to want to be able to filter that table or filter your data in somehow, and that is why we've introduced the filter function. So in order to do that one, you start by typing equals filter into the grid in your cell. And in this case, this function is filtering the array of sales. And you can see that the array of sales is basically my entire table that I've selected from A to F. And then I want to filter those sales on the region, which is column C in my table, region. And I want to filter it when that region is equal to whatever state that I have specified. So in other words, I want to return the entire table but only for the data where the region is Vermont. And so once I set up that formula, you can see that this is just a 2x2 grid, but it's actually a dynamic array. So if I try to overtype here, it's going to pound spill, and it's going to pound spill into this single cell because that is one formula I have used to make this work. And again, I can select obstructing cells and delete that to have it spill back. And this is just kind of to show that we have two-dimensional capabilities within arrays. It's not just a single column or a single row that you can use, but we do smart things with two-dimensional data. So I talked for a long time there, but I want to take the opportunity to ask if anyone has any questions about dynamic arrays or things that you've experienced that have been weird that you want to ask about. And it's okay if you don't. We also have time for questions at the end.
I don't see any questions yet. But just for clarification, the conditional formatting you had in that last column, is that something that's going through the dynamic array, or that's just a fixed reference, isn't it?
I'm pretty sure it is a fixed reference for this whole column. So if I add data to that, it is just on that column itself.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Just making sure the folks at home know.
Yes, thank you. That is not a part of the dynamic array. I think there was a cool part of this demo that Joe set up for me where I can actually sort this filtering and I can sort by. Oh, and I want to sort, I want to sort this returning array that is a 2D array. And then but I want to sort, oh yeah, sort by is what I meant to type in here. And I can sort by this particular array, which is, you know, the revenue. Oh, and I've done it poorly. Like I said, I'm a minor in calc and not a major in calc, so forgive me for not being able to change my demo super on the fly.
Yeah, I think you have the right idea. It's pointing to the revenue column and the data, I think.
Exactly. That's the goal. But
yeah, so column F.
Oh yeah. You're right. I'm pointing to the data that's being returned, and you're right. I need to point to the data that's in the revenue column. Nope, I didn't do it right. Okay, forgive me. We're done. You can't see this. You can't see all of my struggles behind the curtain. Forgive me. So I will just leave it as the way Joe intended it, as a filter example. But since it's dependent on column in here, I can change that to California and I can get my entire summary to change. So this whole workbook is essentially three formulas, one in the product, one in the units, and one in the invoice. So dynamic arrays are really flexible and helpful for summarizing and pulling out data like this. So the next function that I want to show is the XLOOKUP function. And so in this particular workbook, it's comparing how you do it in VLOOKUP to how you do it in XLOOKUP. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to show you why XLOOKUP is so great. Because if you start typing equals XLOOKUP, it's pretty self-explanatory, where what is the thing I want to look up? And in this case, the lookup value I've put over here as this invoice. And then it asks me, you know, what is the array that you want to look it up in? And that would be this invoice column. So I want to look up in the invoice column and match what I have in H6. And then what do I want returned? In the end, I want the units. So I push, or I select the units column, and then I hit enter. Do wrong. Give me 1 segundo. I did exactly right. Oh. What? Yeah. This is the same as this. Come on. Do I not have a 1099? Has something terrible happened? Let's find 1021. Yeah, okay, that worked. It must have just changed my invoice here. So apologies. So I did the formula correctly, where in the XLOOKUP function, you want to, it's as simple as 3 arguments. The first one is what you want to match to, where you want to look it up, and then what you want returned. And the difference between that and VLOOKUP is that when you use VLOOKUP, you have to make sure that the column that you're looking something up in stays the same. So for example, here in this formula, okay, when I'm doing VLOOKUP, I have the lookup value, which is what is in this cell H6, but I have to put in the entire table of the thing I want to look up and then count and say, okay, I actually want the 4th column. What does that 4th column mean? That 4th column is the units column, right? And so that's how it gets me to the number 5. Well, what happens if someone comes in here and inserts a new column in your table to the left of the units column, and let's say it's like number sold or something like that? All of a sudden your VLOOKUP formula is returning the wrong data because it's fixed. VLOOKUP is a fixed function where it can only look up things to the left essentially, and it has to start, you know, with that index and of, you know, the invoices on the left, and then it looks up things to the right, and it can only look up a certain number of columns away. So the flexibility of XLOOKUP and the fact that it protects against things like if someone else adds a column to your table, you don't want that to mess up your formulas. And so with XLOOKUP, because you have the flexibility to say what specific column you want to look things up in and what specifically you want returned, you can add columns to the left of invoice, you can add columns to the left or right of units, and XLOOKUP will consistently return the correct value, the value you intended. And that is not the same for VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP is a very sketchy function. So I encourage you to learn how to use XLOOKUP if that is something that you find yourself needing to do in any of the spreadsheets you're building. Any questions on XLOOKUP? I don't think I saw any in the chat. Okay. So back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so the next function I want to talk to you about is the let function. So if you haven't heard of the let function, it's relatively a new one. It is released to all of our audiences. So if you are on the latest monthly subscription in Excel, you should have it available. And again, you get to it by typing equals let. Now, I don't want to say it's a complex function, but the way it's set up might feel like it's taking you back to algebra class. But hopefully with a little bit of basics, building on those basics, it will actually make the spreadsheets that you create easier to read for everybody auditing your spreadsheet, or even yourself. I know I've had times where I've come back a year later to my spreadsheet and I'm like, what did I mean here? Why am I using the number 9? Where did 9 come from? And I'm like, oh, I wish I remembered what that specific 9 was referencing. And turns out it might be something like, oh, this was the number of kids in the class. Like, obviously that was 9 at the time, but now what does that mean? So in this formula, you can make let work with as few as 3 variables. And you can also exercise your creative side because you have to come up with the names of your own variables. And that is the first component to writing the let function, is deciding on a variable name to start with. So in this case, throwing it back to math class, number 1 here on the slide, it says let x, and that's your variable name. And then the second parameter in the function is what that name represents in value. So in this situation, you can think of let x equals 1 be that first set of key value pairs that you get there. So x comma 1 is let x equal 1. In my example of the kids in the class, it would be let kids in class comma 9. So that would be there's 9 kids in the class. And then the third thing you would put inside of your formula, and the very basic formula, is the calculation. And now that calculation is exactly the same calculation that you would put in Excel. So it's essentially a nested formula where you can, use a sum function. You can use unique if you want. You can use any of our Excel formulas as a part of your calculation. And I know when I'm building certain formulas, if I want them to last, one of the things that I do is I will have multiple columns to make sure that I get each component of my formula correct when I'm building some sort of calculation. And then what ends up happening is then I re-nest them. I've basically deconstructed my formula and then I nest it all back together and then I have one thing. With this concept of let, in terms of deconstructing those cells, in deconstructing that formula, I can have each part of my formula represent something. And so in this first example, the calculation I'm doing is simple. It is let x equal 1, and the calculation is make x plus 1 be the answer. So in this case, 1 and 1 is 2. In the second example, we've introduced a second variable, and this is the y. So we are smart enough to know that if you have defined x comma 1 for x equals 1, and the next thing you put is y, we're not going to treat y like the calculation parameter. We're going to treat it as if you're defining more variables. So here you go y comma 1, which means let x equal 1 and then let y equal 1. And then the very last parameter in your function is going to be x plus y. So in this case, 1 plus 1 is 2. Here is another example that is a little more complicated. So in your head, think about what the result of this formula that I have written out here is. And here's the picture that I had on the slide before. So in this case, let z equal the sum of 1 and 2. Let 0 equal the max of -1 and -5, and calculate what z plus 0 is. I'll give you a second to think about it. A is a trick answer. That is not correct. The answer is actually 2, because Excel will calculate the nested formulas first. So it'll calculate the sum of 1 and 2 to be 3. It'll say let z equal 3. It'll calculate the max of -1 and 5 to be -1. So let 0 equal -1. And then it does the calculation of, oh, z is 3, 0 is -1. Therefore, we've got 3 minus 1, which is 2. So that is an example of how the let function works. This is just a basic example of how let can make your code more readable for when you're doing stuff, for when you come back to it. So in the beginning, your original formula is, if something is blank, have the dash, otherwise filter these ranges to match Fred, and then the second part is I'm sorry. Then the second part is filtering the ranges to be Fred again. So this is your conditional check, and then if not, return that, and then if it is, return the actual filtered list. Well, using let, we can set a parameter to be our filter criteria named Fred. And then we can set our filter range to be this same range that we used twice above. We're only going to use it once here. and that's going to be called, and we're using our filter criteria in our function for our filtered range. And so that is just the power of Excel as well, is that these nested things are capable of happening, where I've already defined my filter criteria to be Fred. So if I want to use filter criteria to define what my filtered range is, you can do that with the let function as well. And so then, you know, the calculation becomes, well, if it's blank, do this, otherwise show the filtered range. I will point out that one of the benefits of let is performance, because in the first example on top here in the original formula, you are actually calling the filter function twice. And so you have to do the filter to evaluate the first thing, and Excel is great, but it still has its flaws. So we basically do that to evaluate it, throw away the result, and then have to do it again. And so if you're working with a bunch of data or a lot of calculation, and you need to do that multiple times, let is going to be one of your best friends, because in the bottom equation, we're only doing the actual filter function one time. And let basically allows us to kind of cache that result and reuse it throughout the remainder of the function. So if you need to do something multiple times, the let function is going to be hopefully very, very helpful. And this was just the result of that example I showed you previously. Are there any questions off the top of your head about let? Okay. I'll also have time for questions at the end, but the next function I want to talk through is Lambda, and then I will put these together in an example that I'll show you here in a second. So the Lambda function is also a new function. It's kind of a companion function to let. We decided to do these functions almost in the same meeting, so to speak, and it's just to help you guys, our customers, fully realize the power of Excel as a programming language. We realize that many people use Excel as a logic engine, and if you're going to use it as a logic engine, you're going to need this Lambda function, and it's really good for reusing formulas that you previously defined, so that you're able to have these reuse of functions. So its tagline for a Lambda function is custom functions without code. And the code bit is like, you don't need to use VBA to define your own custom function. You do have to write your own formula, but most people are used to that. And I know that, you know, VBA is not something I specialize in Excel. It's challenging to understand it without the use of the macro recorder. That's about all I can do in terms of my VBA experience personally. But Lambda is something that once it was taught to me, I was able to pick it up and run with it, because it just builds on the knowledge of how to write a formula in Excel. So the thing that might seem similar to let here is that you do have to define like a name for your formula. And so when you have the equals Lambda function, the first thing you're going to do is define your input names and how many input parameters you're going to have as a part of your function. And then the last part is going to be the calculation. And so when you define these things, I'll show you how to define them, but you define them in the name manager. And so once they're defined in the name manager, you can use them and reference them in your workbook. And so in this case, it has two inputs, and they named the function myLambda. So when I call myLambda on two inputs, it's going to add those two inputs together, just as I've previously defined that formula to work. So, like I said, you have to, right now, we're working on figuring out how to improve this and to make it more workbook stable, but meaning that you could define it in the workbook itself, like in a cell, but we're not there yet. So in order to take advantage of this Lambda function, you have to go to the name manager. And if you've never been to the name manager before, the search box is very helpful for things like this. And all you have to do, name manager, type in name. It's the first thing that comes up. And it's a modal dialog that appears, and it will show you the names you've added to your workbook. And in order to create a Lambda, you would just click new. Okay. And so we'll get back to this in a second, but you have to start at the name manager for Lambdas, for the actual defining of your Lambda function for reuse in your code or in your workbook. So, okay, so in this example, the name is what you're going to refer to it as when you type it into your workbook. And then the refers to is going to be your formula. And in my example that I'm about to show you, I'm going to show you how I build up my Lambdas, because I rely on what I call like the type ahead, and making sure that it works in my grid before I go and say, yes, I'm ready to commit this to a formula. So in this case, what I have here is a just brief table of weather temperatures. And these temperatures are in Celsius, which might be super familiar for you folks in Australia, but I will tell you the US did not do me good in the Celsius department. And so in order to get a grasp of what are these temperatures that you're experiencing in Sydney, I am going to need to have those in Fahrenheit. And so I just wanted to verify here, yes, the average maximum temperature in January is 36.12 C. But what is that in Celsius? So I have my little cheat sheet here for, oh, what is this formula going to look like? And so if I want this formula to convert this to Fahrenheit in one cell, I'm going to type in equals, and then, okay, it's this in Celsius, and then I want to multiply it by 9/5, and then I want to add 32 to it. Okay, and so, oh, wow, it's hot in January. Oh, right, because that's your summer. I'm smart. So I add that here, and then I'm like, okay, that's the formula for Fahrenheit. And if I wanted, I could completely like fill this down and be done with it. But I'm going to have, let's pretend I'm building like a weather tracker workbook for multiple cities. I'm going to have to do that calculation multiple times. And it's just going to be easier for me if I can put in the degrees Celsius and then just expect the degrees Fahrenheit out of it. So in order to do that, I'm going to go and write a Lambda function. Now I'm going to, because this is the function I used, I'm going to just copy that function and then go to the name manager. Oh, it's because I'm editing a cell. Then I'm going to go to the name manager. I'm going to create a new Lambda, and I'm going to call this C2F. And then the refers to, it has to start with equals Lambda. And then the first parameter is going to be what I'm going to call my input parameter. So I'm going to call it X in this case. And then the second thing I'm going to put is my calculation. So now I'm going to edit it a little bit. I hope this isn't too small to see, but now I'm going to edit this a little bit because I copied this straight out of my workbook. Well, I wanted to reference E2, and why was I doing that? Oh, because that's the input. So that is the input to my cell. So I'm basically going to take E2 and replace it with X. So whatever I give to my Lambda function C to F, I want to take it, multiply it by 9/5, and add 32. Perfect. So now I have C2F in my name manager. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to type equals and then C2, oh, hey, my custom function appears in my grid that I can use, and it takes one input. So I'm going to just reference cell E2 here, and then I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to give me that same output. So now I can just use my C2F function anywhere in my workbook that I need to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit, and it's just that easy. Now, if I were you know, just because I know that this particular function, the 9/5 and the 32, clue me in that this is how I get from Celsius to Fahrenheit, I could also use let to structure this to like teach me just kind of like better hygiene. So in this case, if I were to rename this, because I have two constants, I can use my constants in my calculation. So here I've got one constant that is my fraction. I wish I knew more about weather to know what that actual 9/5 represents, but maybe I'll just call it ratio, because there's that ratio. And then what is that ratio? It's 9/5, and that's a constant for me. And then what's my next? You know, and then my next variable, we'll call it the base, which would be that adding 32. And so we'll make that base equal to 32. And so when I want to do my calculation, I'm going to do E2 again here, and then E2 times ratio, and you can see it appear in my dropdown, times ratio plus base. And so now this is a function using let that gives me the exact same result. But if I want to be extra fancy, I can take this let function, go to my name manager, and nest it inside of here. So when I edit this function, instead of this calculation, I can replace that with the let calculation, where I define ratio and base. But again, I don't want E2, I want my input, which in this case I've called X. And so I just edited that formula, and you can see that I'm still using that formula here, so nothing has changed. But if someone comes in to audit my workbook and they're like, well, what is happening here? They can look at the C2F function and see what formula I'm using and why I'm using it that way. So there really is some great benefits to let and lambda if you kind of take the time to learn them. So that is my demo. Any questions so far that you've seen? Doesn't look like it.
Yeah, Liam's typing something. Oh, no, Liam's just saying he's got to go. All good.
Oh, yeah. I guess, yeah, we ran out of time, probably because I had like a 6-minute hiccup in there that you all were super patient for. So I really appreciate that. I have this presentation available on a shortcut, which is aka.ms/Excel for fun. So if you want to pull up like these resources again to see them, or there's some links in here about stuff I didn't quite get to, which is kind of about data types, but honestly, Tim, we probably could do another session once you've gotten this rolling a little bit more just on data types. And I guess my teaser is that you folks saw that I got the weather here somehow. It's from this Sydney data type. And I guess that's my teaser, where it's basically data types are facts built into to a single cell connected to the internet. So there's a bunch of stuff we can do with that another time.
Absolutely. C has a question in the chat. When is Lambda due to be generally available?
Okay, so Lambda should actually be. Maybe I'm confused because let and lambda both start with L. I know let is 100% available. I thought lambda was also 100% available, but there's a chance you may not have it if you're not on the latest Microsoft 365 subscription, or if you're on like a semi-annual channel, which means that you won't get access until like July for the lambda function. The easiest thing, if you just are itching to use it now, the easiest thing to do is to join our insider program and sign up to be an Office insider. And I'm sure Tim can walk you through how that works sometimes. But it basically gets you on the latest and greatest bits before everybody else.
Yep.
Available.
I was going to say, I think Lambda is definitely not on, it's not in current, I didn't think, is it?
That's a great question.
I'm pretty sure Let is available everywhere now, but Lambda, at least Lambda's not in 3.6 Excel Online. I've just tried it there.
You are probably right, and I am just a little bit crazy. Just getting confused between Let and Lambda.
Yeah. Chona, apologies I'm mispronouncing your name. XLOOKUP is available now. So I think basically any build that has dynamic arrays will have XLOOKUP.
Right. Yes.
I think Lambda is 100% in insiders.
Okay, but maybe not into the public yet?
Yeah, maybe not current channel.
Okay. Sorry about that.
So yeah, if you want to get Lambda working, try out. You can sign up for the insiders build, or just play around with Let to start off with. That's Let itself is pretty good too.
Yeah,
I've actually had a lot of fun working with Let in Excel Online and just realizing, hey, I can do this here.
Yeah. So XLOOKUP is available. Like, hopefully you will all see that, but Lambda is probably not in the production audience yet, is what I've gathered so far. So if you want to use Lambda now, I put a link in the chat for how to upgrade your Excel. Any other questions? I really hope you all kind of enjoyed this. I know it was kind of a formal, informal presentation, and I hope that eventually, Tim, I'll be able to come back and talk in depth about data types, which is my major, so to speak. But we can also get some of my coworkers in here to go in depth on anything else. So.
Absolutely. No, we'd be very happy to have you back, Kaycee.
Fantastic.
No,
I hope everyone stays healthy and happy.
Alrighty, thank you, Kaycee. I guess one final thing for those who didn't catch what I said earlier, our next session, which I've just put a date down because I don't really have much to go by in terms of what people want to see. I figured the next session would be good to find out what people want to see. So what we'll do is build a survey in order to ask guests of the user group what you'd like to see in future sessions. So we will build that in the next session of the Sydney user group, Sydney Excel user group. And so come join us on Wednesday the 26th. We'll have it as a lunchtime session so that people don't have to wake up at 8 a.m. And yeah, we'll hopefully look forward to seeing you there. If you haven't joined us on the meetup group or the LinkedIn group, this is where we'll be posting all of our updates at the moment until further notice. So please do join those as well. Otherwise, does anyone else have any final questions or thoughts? The recording, really good point. I will post a note on one of these or both of these groups when the recording is uploaded. Yeah, and if you're watching the recording, then clearly it's been online and you've seen it, so it's all good. All right. Last chance for live questions. Otherwise, what we'll do, we'll wrap this up, and people can ask any further questions on YouTube or wherever else we post this recording.
Fantastic.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you for joining us for our first our inaugural session, and look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.